Hello, Spiceheads. Thanks for being with us for today's webinar, Backup Vendor Eats Its Own Dog Food, brought to you by Arcserve. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email from us within a couple of days with the links to check out the recording on demand. Also, there is a Q&A box on your screen. When you submit a question, it will disappear from the box and queue up on our side. But don't worry, we have it, and we will ask those questions at the end. If we do not get to your question, we will be able to follow up with you after the event. There's also a live chat, so jump in and have a conversation with your fellow IT pros. So let's get started. Our presenters today are Brian Flanagan, Senior IT Manager, and Christophe Bertrand, VP of Product Marketing. So Christophe, I will hand it to you to get started.
Thank you very much, David. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webcast. I have the great honor of having our favorite IT dude with us here. His name is Brian Flanagan, and in a minute he's going to tell us more about who he is, what he's done, and the purpose of today and the next 30 minutes or so is to really take you through what we do as not only as a backup vendor, but how we eat our own dog food, how we use our own products, and how somebody like Brian has a unique perspective on backup and recovery, high availability, ransomware, archiving, and storage in general. So quite a bit to cover. And what I'd like for you to do, if you don't mind, is go ahead and submit your questions. I'm going to keep an eye on the questions that you submit as Brian tells us more about what he's doing here, and we'll try to interject them into the conversation. So don't be shy. I know you're not shy. So please go ahead and send your questions as we get ready. So now I'd like to turn it over to Brian to introduce himself, and just a few bullet points here for you to know what he's done and have this in front of you. But I think, Brian, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your background and really share your experience from being on both sides of the equation.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Brian Flanagan. I've been with Arcserve since 2001. I started out in development where I helped dev and QA teams, ensure that the various vendor solutions worked with the Arcserve product suite. So I was in kind of a unique situation where, we have our standard test cases that everybody tests against, and coming from, an IT background, being able to use my knowledge and following the standard test best practices and test cases to ensure that our products work in the real world. So I worked with Dev and QA. I worked with our various third-party partners just to ensure that everyone was at a level playing ground and that the product works as intended.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So, and really, when you think about it, it gives you a pretty unique perspective, right? You being in QA, your job is to make sure that the backup and recovery components all work, right? And that's a pretty complex type of product that we have. And just for the benefit of the audience, I just want to remind them that we're really at the intersection of networking, storage, of course, servers, hypervisors, you name it. So do you have some maybe some anecdotes to share with us from being that QA background that you've had, that you've been able to take into your current IT job?
Sure. So one of the things that we rolled out over the years in Arcserve is outside of the standard test cases, we decided to deploy and build out what we call the real world, where we build out an internal real world environment with SQL servers, Exchange servers, SharePoint. Basically the full gamut of what a real customer would have, and we test that with the latest QA builds, the development builds, just to make sure that as the product hits each milestone and gets ready towards GA, that it's not just installing the latest build on a product. You're dropping into an environment that's current, that's ready, that's always has a SQL backup running, always has an Exchange server running. So we're sure that the product functions as it will be once it gets out to the real world. So deploying that type of environment has helped us and ultimately the customers, meet meet all our goals.
Okay, thank you. Well, so what I'd like to do is, since we've covered a little bit about what Arcserve already, I'd like to maybe take a second and talk about Arcserve, and then go back to the products and the backup and recovery type of initiatives we help our customers with, but also the type of solutions that you've been able to play with in the environment. So again, please don't be shy and ask your questions, because it's a pretty unique thing to have a vendor's IT guy on the webcast here. So first of all, thank you to all of you who met us at Spice World. It was a great show. Just wanted to remind everybody we had a fantastic booth with the mini basketball, mini hoop going on. Lots of great contests, and somehow Brian ended up being in all of the photos. But more importantly, let's talk about our Arcserve and what we've done in the past few years. We've been in this business for many years as a vendor in backup and recovery. However, this being said, we've become independent again, and that happened about 3.5 years ago, and all of a sudden became this large, the most successful and large vendor being independent all overnight, and we've been very successful, as I said, simply because the quality of our products and held by people like Brian who do QA and a lot of work in the engineering side of things. We've been recognized with many awards. You can see them listed here. We're a global business, so it makes us pretty unique in that. And that's something that Brian will talk about. That's very important, especially for those of you who may have a couple of international locations or more. We're all over the world. That gives us a unique perspective on what backup and recovery, what disaster recovery is all about, and that's something that I wanted to highlight. We have a number of solutions. So we're a software company, as you see here. But what it means also is that it's given us the ability to go expand into a number of other areas beyond the traditional on-premise software that you would see for backup and recovery. We provide appliances that bundle everything together. We also provide a great disaster recovery as a service solution. So we've really extended our horizons. So that's Arcserve in a nutshell. We've been in business again for many years, and more recently as an independent company. And this experience has really given us a lot of perspective on the business. So our portfolio, which we call the UDP platform, can be really broken down in a number of functions. And this is where I'll be asking Brian some questions about, what he does with our technology. So we provide fundamentally backup and recovery. So that means protecting your traditional server environments as well as your hypervisors. We can back up pretty much from any source to any target, and that's a very strong benefit of our solution. We also provide very advanced capabilities for disaster recovery, whether on-premise or in the cloud or in sort of hybrid configurations where you do recovery on-premise and also have the option to do so in the cloud, including public cloud. So we have a number of technologies and engines we use in the background under a unified console that makes it very simple for our end users to really create this workflow and really control their recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. We also have a high availability option in our solution, which gives you continuous data replication, the ability to fail over, fail back. We can also do that in the public cloud. And more recently, we've added a number of new components around archiving, especially email archiving, which is a big thing these days. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And also around the ability to back up to a cloud. We have our own cloud service now, which we call Arcserve UDP Cloud Direct. So these are the high-level functionalities of our platform and what we're going to now talk about in a little more detail. So moving on to the part where we make this happen in our environment. Tell us a little bit about Brian, about what products we use at Arcserve. I think that's kind of the first general question, and maybe provide some highlights of how we use each of them, and tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So we do use, obviously, all the products that we market. As you mentioned, we are a global company. We have 6 sites globally, with between our R&D, our support, our main headquarters, and using all of the products between Arcserve UDP, Arcserve Archiving, and Arcserve RHA. RHA. It allows us to really meet all of the needs of the business. So, we use Arcserve RHA to replicate our builds from our various locations. So, we'll have daily builds that get replicated from site to site. So our development teams can do QA builds, can test QA on the latest build. Our support teams can get access to the latest builds to make sure that everything looks good on their end. RHA is definitely a very important piece of our network, be it that we obviously use it to replicate our builds, like I mentioned, but we also use it to replicate our business data. So we have people all over the world where a file server is in, say, our headquarters in North America. Rather than having a user replicate that data, access that data over the WAN, RHA is keeping a live copy and copying it to a local site to save them time to get their jobs done.
Yeah.
Sorry, good.
Yeah. So just to maybe kind of clarify for the audience also here, the fact is, we have our business is software development, really. So for us, it's very, very key. Anytime you go check in a new piece of code, I mean, that's our IP. That's essentially our money, right? That's how we build our product. So having this capability is very critical to our business. Probably it's at the heart of everything we do, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the most important features of our product, where our source control is getting backed up, on an hourly basis, every day, and then we do a backup, once a week, and the product gives us the flexibility to, if there's a network glitch, if there's a server crash, our product has the option of recovering data back to as little as 15 minutes, depending on how the backup job was created. So between Arcserve UDP or Arcserve RHA, customers can have a level of comfort they want to recover data back wherever they want to. They can recover it back to their bare metal server. They can recover it to a hypervisor or to Amazon or Azure.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we do quite a bit in public cloud as well. So can you maybe, again, without getting into necessarily the confidential detail, but give us a couple of examples of one time when something went wrong and you actually had to conduct recoveries for the business?
Sure. So we've had cases where, due to weather issues, due to really circumstances outside of our control, we've had servers go down. We've had file servers just not be responsive, and due to the time and of day or time period of where that was, the quickest thing to do was just to simply do a recovery of that file folders and restore it to a different server elsewhere on the network. So we was able to restore down to the last hour. So our finance team was able to get their files back immediately and almost immediately, and get there and continue on with their day.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
So again, the strength of the product is, no matter what data you have, be it Exchange, SQL, virtual machines, file servers, we can protect it. And how the backup time that you select, you can restore that data back. And the mission critical files can be restored wherever you need them, whenever you need them.
Right, and that's really the RPO and RTO sort of dimensions. So recovery point objective, which is how current the data is and how much data you've lost potentially, and recovery time objective, which is how long it takes to get back on your feet. So just to focus on that a little bit, and also in the context of having 6 global sites. Can you tell us how you manage that? I mean, this is a global organization. That must be quite a challenge with the time zones and the fact that we have critical data all over the place.
Correct. So we use our RHA product to replicate our builds. We use Arcserve UDP to be able to back up our data and restore our data. And with RHA and Arcserve UDP, if a server goes down, we can recall that data within minutes. And what will happen is, if the customer needs to tell us that, if our business group comes to us and says that we need to recover our SQL database or a piece of source code, because of the recovery time objectives that we set, we can restore that data back to our headquarters in the U.S. We can restore it back to India or China. The flexibility of the product is that what the business needs, we can do it. And the customer has that type of flexibility where they can have with either an Arcserve UDP appliance or their own servers that they build themselves. If the jobs are created and backups are running, their data can come back, will come back.
Excellent. So I'm just looking at the Q&A sections. We're starting to get some questions actually there. All of a sudden, we're getting a bunch. The good question that came through here, how do we decrease the amount of time that it takes to back up data? So maybe we can talk about deduplication in UDP. I think that's a good theme.
Correct. So as far as decreasing the amount of time it takes to back up the data, so what will happen is with our dedupe, let's say you're backing up, let's say you have a Windows 2016 server. The OS is, say 60 gig. If you have many of those servers all around the world, or on different sites, the first full backup will take, a half hour depending on your network speed. Everything after that, with our block level incremental and dedupe, we're only going to back up just the data that's really unique to that particular server. So your backup times will go from a half hour down to minutes, depending on how much unique data the customer has at their sites. And the more data that's the same, the quicker the backups are. So
right, and that data is replicated essentially. It can be replicated to multiple data centers if we want to, right?
Correct, and that's one of the best practices for any backup vendor is, they call it 3-2-1 type of backup steps. You want 3 copies of your data. You want 1 copy online, obviously in a running server. You have 1 copy offline, be it we have a module called Virtual Standby, where the VM the backup of that server is waiting to be turned on. So that's your offline copy. And then you have a truly offsite copy, where that can be replicated to your DR site, be it in your own premises, remote DR site. It could be Azure, it could be Amazon Web Services, or in the case of a customer who has the Arcserve Cloud Direct, we can back up your data to our own data centers in the cloud. So you have 3 tiers or more, depending on how many copies you want to replicate. You have multiple options to recover your data.
Excellent. So that's really eating your own dog food here. There's no question about that. So one more question or kind of area of interest here is, what would you say? I mean, you kind of touched upon it earlier. What would you say our most critical applications are in our business, being a software / appliance vendor?
For us, it really comes down to obviously we're a software company, is our source code, and obviously the things that people use every day, like email. So the product allows us to protect the mission critical email servers. So be it your Exchange servers, your Office 365 in the cloud service, the product will allow you to back up your data, and if your Exchange server goes down and you need to recover your executive's mailbox, if that server is down, if that data is missing, your day can go bad pretty fast. And the same thing with same thing with source control.
Right.
So,
that's probably even worse.
yes, definitely.
Yeah, I can hear your phone ringing in the background. I'm sure somebody's lost something, right?
Yeah, I apologize for that.
No worries. We know what happens with phones and IT guys. Hey, so there's a question, and maybe I'll take this one because I can answer very quickly around whether we back up, where we back up directly to. So I just want to cover this one real quick. So we do two things, right, for backup and recovery, right? We can back up do a disk to cloud, which is really, the fact that you would back up to an on-premise appliance or your backup server. It's the same software, right? And then you send a secondary copy, to Brian's earlier point, to a cloud destination. That could be a private cloud. It could be a service provider that you use that runs another instance of our software, or it could be Azure or AWS. And I want to point that out because that's the question was really around AWS and Azure. And we do support, by the way, the same advanced functionality such as virtual standby and instant VM in those environments, which gives you actually a better cost profile as well. And for those of you who are interested, we can also do high availability with failover and failback in the cloud in the public cloud with AWS with our high availability solution. So just a point there. So what I'd like to do is maybe talk a little bit about archiving and maybe to introduce the theme because there were a couple of questions on that as well. Archiving and backup are different animals, and sometimes I feel people, certainly end users, and sometimes even ourselves, vendors, we use the term archive a little too loosely. And I think there are different ways of looking at this. But backup, as we were just discussing, is really about having data for the purpose of recovery. That's really the net. And here I have a definition that sounds a lot more intelligent than what I just said, but it's really the fact that if you lose your data, you want to be able to get a copy back. Versus an archive, which is really about the ability to protect data for the long term in a way that will make it unchangeable. It cannot be modified. And also combining that with search capabilities. So these are very different engines and they're very different use cases. And in many ways, to be clear, you're going to be hard-pressed to do archive with backup solution, and you're going to be very hard-pressed to do to do backup with an archive solution, and certainly recovery would be very painful. So I was wondering if maybe, Brian, obviously we have an archiving solution. This is a recent, reasonably new solution for us that we've just added to the portfolio. Can you tell us about it and sort of what your experience has been with our UDP archiving and maybe some anecdotes you can share with us?
Sure. So the archiving solution is fairly new. It got rolled out, I guess, middle of this year, and it can be housed in different ways. It can be run in different locations. You can run it on-premise, on your in your data center on VMware or Hyper-V, or you can also run it in Amazon Web Services. So as far as deploying it and using it, you're right. It's more of an archive solution where you go into your web server and you basically configure what's called journaling, and every email that the customer gets or that we get as an Arcserve get is it gets delivered to two locations. It'll go to the end user, and it'll also go to this archive. And what that lets us do from a compliancy perspective is if there is a legal question or if we need to put someone on legal hold for say a patent or some other case where we need to keep somebody's email for a year, 5 years, or whatever the legal case may be, is if the user deletes an email, if they clean up their PST file or other mailbox, that mail is deleted locally, but from an auditing perspective, I have the option of, I have the ability to go into my archiving solution and look for an email from a subject, from from or to type of email where I can type in what I'm looking for, and anything that came through the web, anything that came through the Exchange server or Gmail server or Exchange Online, Office 365, anything that the user gets will also be archived there. So I can search for a subject called Spiceworks. I will search for that email, and I have an option of saving that out as a zip file. I can save it as a message file, an EML file, and I could take that email, that content, and forward it over to my legal department, my HR department, for them to do whatever they need for the next step. So it's more of an archiving and compliancy product, and it's been very useful for us to be able to save the data as well, to get whatever data we need. You know, we've had cases where users may have deleted a file. We have an option to have an Outlook plugin where a user can self-service go into the email archive product and pull back data that they want to search for. You know, their laptop may only have a limited amount of space. They can log into the portal themselves and pull out emails that they want to save or they want to look at. So it's very handy from a compliance perspective and from an end user self-service perspective, where they can get their email wherever they are. They can use the web browser, or they can use the Outlook client to get data back.
Well, that's a very good use, and this is where maybe archiving, sort of traditional backup, kind of gets replaced a little bit by archiving, but it's only going to be for very limited type of recoveries, right? So it's really the search piece that seems to be the important one here. By the way, there were a couple of questions around how we comply with local laws and protecting company data, and that's how we do it, because our archiving piece allows us, that's partially how we do it, obviously. There are other components to it from a company perspective beyond IT, but this is one way you'd protect, you'd ensure you can comply with regulations. That includes moving forward. Very soon our new regulations come into play. In Europe, for example, called GDPR, that will affect everybody, even in the US. And if you haven't heard that term, and you have any customer data where you have European residents with personal information in any database that your business manages, you're going to learn about GDPR real quick. That's for sure. So anyway, this is how we do it. We use archiving, and also it's a great tool that can be used for other searches and to overall limit risk also, because you can go search for terms that proactively and all that. What I'd like to do, there are a few questions that I think really pertain to the next section, which is really our last slide, and that's around ransomware. But before we even talk about ransomware and talk about some of the best practices, obviously ransomware is a logical disaster, right? What do we do, or what do you do to proactively test for recovery? What best practices do you use, and what do you recommend to our listeners?
So as far as best practices go to protect the data, it's a two-phase effort. There's the employee or the end user training to recognize what a bad email or a phishing attack is. But from an IT perspective, as far as protecting the server, protecting the source data, obviously, you want to make sure that your machines are fully patched up with Windows patches. You want to make sure that your firewall is locked down as tightly as possible. As far as, you want to make sure that basically the server that is acting as your backup server, or any server, it's not being used for browsing the web, other than what's absolutely necessary, because that's where a lot of the ransomware or the malware links will come in, and you may not even realize that it's a bad link. As far as what we do and what I've seen to really lock down the servers, it really goes down to what I just mentioned, making sure that your server is is protected. Microsoft, and we do it internally, is Microsoft recommends that, SMB shares, you disable your SMB version 1 settings in the registry. Anything that, any of the known exploits, be it WannaCrypt or WannaCry, and all the various splinters that new stuff is always coming out. You want to make sure, again, that you're fully patched, you lock down your SMB sites, and again, you do your backups. So if something does make its way into the network inadvertently from an end user or a phishing email or some case, that you have the option to restore your data as quickly as possible. And that's one of the benefits of Arcserve, where you can do your backups as little as 15 minutes apart. And if something does go wrong, you have an option of recovering that data as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and we have many examples of customers who've done that, and especially in the healthcare space, and lots of attacks there. Obviously, the one question I would have for you, and that's one of the questions we got, how do you do, in general terms now, beyond ransomware, how do we do disaster recovery testing? What do you do for disaster recovery testing?
Yeah, I saw that come in, and I wanted to make sure we covered that. So Arcserve Backup, Arcserve UDP, and RHA all have various methods of doing recovery assurance. So basically, the way we can ensure our data is integrity is you do a backup every hour, 15 minutes, or whatever the case may be, and we have an option to do what we call an assured recovery test. And what that will do is that will take your source data, your file server, your SQL server, whatever you're trying to protect, and it will take that backup point, that recovery point, and mount it. And we have code, in our product that will take that recovery point, will mount it, and will make sure that the data that is there is usable. We can run a check disk on the various drives. We can run scripts against your SQL database, against your Exchange databases, and if the backup is successful, if the recovery point is successful, we then display that in our dashboard, so a backup administrator can see and report up to his management that we have 2 levels of protection. We have your recovery point from 15 minutes ago, and you also have your assured recovery test of that backup, or as many backups as you want to test, so you know that if you ever have to roll back because of a virus or a system crash or whatever happened, that recovery point is valid. So Arcserve UDP has the option to, again, do that assured recovery. You can either schedule that automatically, or you can go to the recovery point browser, right-click on a recovery point from, say, 2 days ago, and say, run assured recovery. And it will run those same exact tests on whatever recovery point you want to test against. And we have an options of displaying in our dashboard of our SLAs. So the customer can set their RPO and RTO scenarios, and we will be able to tell you that, yes, your data is recovered from the last recovery point, and it's also recoverable up to however far back you need to recover. We also have the option of taking a recovery point and shipping it off-site, or shipping it off the backup server. So you can save, let's say you save your last full backup or quarterly backup. You can save that recovery point to a NAS share. You can upload it to Azure. You can upload it to Amazon Web Services. So you have yet another level of protection where your backup is good, your assured recovery is good, and you have a known good point-in-time copy somewhere else, be it Azure, AWS, or on a NAS disk, a NAS file that you could move off-site somewhere. So we have lots of different ways to ensure that the data that you're protecting is good.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the details. And I know there are a couple more questions that I wanted to cover again around disaster recovery. There's one around RTO and RPO, which was, are they really just two different terms for the same thing? And the answer is they are different terms. I know there may be some vendors who combine them. That's an absolute mistake. I'll be very clear. The recovery time objective is really how quickly you can get back on your feet by using what Brian just described, the ability to stand up a virtual machine. And by the way, our cloud service does that in less than 5 minutes. It's as quickly as you can get a virtual machine to boot up, right? So you can do that in a few minutes. And then the recovery point objective will be bringing that recovery point we talked about that could be 15 minutes old, or if you're doing continuous replication, by the way, that essentially is going to be a matter of seconds in that case, right? We're talking here about the kind of regular solution, but if you do the high availability option, if you use that, then it's going to be a much more compressed time frame. So recovery time objectives and point objectives are very different things. And just wanted to mention that. So look, David, I think we have a few more questions. I don't know if you want me to maybe go through a few more questions.
Yes, we do have some time, and questions are still coming in. So if you'd like to address, there is this question about a good balance of backup and archiving. How do you see this coming into public education sector, and what should we be looking for?
Right, and I can take this one because I was actually just discussing this matter recently with one of our with our archiving expert in the business. And so first of all, as I said, backup and archiving are different animals, and that's really what I was showing earlier on this slide here. That shows the fact that backup is really a point in time. Archive is really keeping data objects in a storage system, essentially, for applying a number of rules to those so that they're immutable and can be searched. So archive is not an option. If you think archiving your emails is an option, it's as critical as backup. Let me be very clear. And I think people don't understand that because they never really been exposed to, for those people who don't understand that, they have never been exposed to either a lawsuit where you have to go produce all the emails that pertain to a certain string of keywords or people or whatever the case may be. We've seen that in the space of manufacturing, for example. People are really good with archiving because they know by definition there'll be a lawsuit at some point. Not because people are bad in manufacturing, it's just because of the nature of the business. Parts fail, and there are always questions around that. In education, though, it's a slightly different environment. You really want to provide a service for email to your students, for example. And the key will be to make sure you keep those emails in an archive that's optimized and with ways to redistribute the licenses and things like that. And we support that with our archiving solution. As far as the balance between backup and archiving, again, you need to back up for disaster recovery, and you need to archive for compliance and mitigation of legal risk. And there may be other reasons why you want to do that, such as migrating, for example, from on-premise to 365, for example, or Google in the case of education, more than likely, and then you can go archive that without having to keep a lot of data on-premise. Is it wrong to use the backup and archive in a complementary fashion? No, it's perfect. It's a great idea, and that's what I think we just discussed with Brian. What else can we talk about? There was a question about our appliance and what makes our appliance, our on-prem appliance superior. So I'll give you my view, and I'll let Brian talk about it because he's had to play with it quite a bit. Two things. First of all, the appliance runs our software. Okay, so it's really optimized for the software in terms of storage, networking, and compute. That comes in one package. One thing we mentioned earlier was data reduction and really data deduplication. We do global source-side deduplication, so we can really compress a lot of backup data onto a much smaller footprint. And to give you an example, we typically market our appliances with a 3-to-1 sort of best practice ratio, which is very conservative, meaning if you have an environment where you're going to need, I don't know, say 20 terabyte of backup data, well, you can fit that on a 7 or 8 terabyte footprint of storage because our duplication is that efficient. And that's a very, very conservative number. The mileage will vary. Retention policies will affect that. How much new data you create will affect that. But we've seen data reduction ratios that are pretty incredible, where we can really compress the backup data by rates of 80 to 90%. So it's pretty impressive what we can do with it, and that's because of that block level deduplication that we do. So Brian, you've played with our appliance. What are your thoughts, especially the 8000 series, which is our most recent series?
Yeah, the 8000 series is a great option for customers, depending on the number of machines that they want to protect or the number of terabytes they want to protect. We use them here internally, and it's a great form factor because the customer can, or we can, in a single server, obviously protect our own infrastructure. But if something were to fail, we can stand up that same VM or physical server in a VM using virtual standby. We can use the assured recovery feature all in one platform. We don't need to source a server from Dell or HP or whatever vendor you may want to use. It's a single point of contact from a support perspective. It's a single vendor to reach out for upgrades as far as adding more storage, to expanding it with our expansion features. It's an easier way from a SMB customer, even up to the mid-market customer, where, to be honest, it just works. I can buy a 2U server with 12 drives or whichever platform I purchase, and in a single hardware appliance, I can do everything I need to do. I can back up my data. I can restore it to a virtual machine. I can run the assured recovery. I can then replicate from that appliance to any other server. It could be another appliance. It could be a DR site running, having a Cisco blade. It could be anything I need to do with that data. I can do. And from a form factor, it's impressive to how much data and compute and capacity we have in one box. So if you're a customer who just needs to get backups done and protect your data, it's an appetizing solution versus having to go elsewhere.
Excellent, thank you. And again, it's really based on how much deduplication you can get out of your environments. Your mileage will vary, but we have calculators to help figure that out and size it based on how many VMs, servers, and how much data you have. So there are a couple more questions I'd like to address, and then I think we'll wrap it up. First of all, we do back up with our UDP solution Office 365 mailboxes. We can archive them for sure. We can back them up, and we are also about to release a SharePoint capability, online SharePoint capability in the next few weeks. That's coming very, very soon. So definitely we support 365 as a source. And then I think we covered some of the questions around archiving and backup. And there was a final question I'd like to maybe cover real quick on encryption, which is how our data is encrypted, whether it's at rest and in flight. So maybe we can cover that for us, Brian, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. So as far as the encryption goes, so when you create your RPS data store, you have different levels of protection. You can, when you back up your SQL server, there's two levels. There's two ways you protect it. You can do what we call a session password, which is protecting that session data. So if you were to restore that data on a different console, you would need that session password in order to restore the data, to view it, to do any operation on that particular server. As far as the encryption of the data on the RPS server, we offer 3 levels of encryption 3 levels of AES encryption on that data store. So it's encrypted 2 ways. From a session password, from an on-premise perspective, the administrator or an unwanted user could not simply go to your console and restore data without knowing the password. And backing up that data to an RPS console, either on-premise or replicated to a different RPS server. If the customer turns on encryption, the data is encrypted over the wire using HTTPS, and then once it gets to the RPS server at whichever location, it's encrypted there.
Thank you. And I will also add for our customers who use our Cloud Direct solution that we offer a very similar type of capabilities in terms of in-flight encryption and also a number of additional capabilities around security because obviously it's cloud-based. So David, I'll turn it. Brian, thank you so much for your time. I'll turn it over to you, David, to close. And thank you again, Brian, for sharing this all this vast amount of knowledge you have and sharing what we do with our own products at Arcserve.
Sure, thank you.
All right, thank you, Christophe and Brian. I appreciate it. We hope everyone was able to hear this great presentation today and learn a bit more. I do want to remind everyone that if your question wasn't addressed, someone will be able to follow up with you. Also, if you had to step out or miss any part of today's presentation, you will be receiving an email in a few days with a link to view it on demand. So special thanks to Arcserve for creating this content and sponsoring this great event. And also thanks to all of you for tuning in today. We will see you next time for another SpiceWorks Partner Webinar.